Why don't airline pilots just avoid going through turbulence if we can predict where it's going to be? That's an amazing question. I'll answer it for you. For those watching at home, hi, my name is Ben. I'm an airline captain on the Boeing 737 on my day off, enjoying the time at home, and I'm going to answer why we don't avoid turbulence areas. The answer is, we do. The deeper answer is, they sometimes can't all be avoided altogether. Let's talk about it. So when your flight is planned, let's say you're going from Nashville to Washington, D.C., because that just happens to be what's on my iPad right now for my previous flight, it starts with the dispatcher. The dispatcher is going to be in the operations control center, and then they're going to be looking at the weather, they're going to be looking at a lot of things and putting together a routing for the flight. This gets put into the operational flight plan, or OFP. We're just going to call it the dispatch release. That dispatch release gets filed, I get a copy of it, and it goes to the FAA. The FAA, the air traffic controllers, are going to look at the routing, and then they're going to either give us a clearance that says, yes, you are cleared via that routing, or they're going to look at other factors like traffic flow and traffic management, and they might give us a reroute, a different routing. Unfortunately, it seems like the FAA reroutes don't always take into account weather, not that much. It is then up to your captain, or your flight crew rather, because any captain worth their salt is going to coordinate with their first officer, to come up with a plan if this reroute is good for us, and how can we accommodate the needs of the FAA with the needs of us, with the needs of you. I'm going to try to keep the rest of the video as short as I can, but let me show you the tools that I'm going to use to look at your flight to make sure that we have the smoothest and safest ride possible. This is an app called WSI, and this is going to be my primary tool for checking the weather for my route of flight. There's a lot of information here, let me break it down a little bit. The blue lines are indicating the jet stream. These little tick marks here are winds aloft, and if you look at the little tail feathers, they look different. Each one of these indicate the velocity. A triangle is 50 knots, a half a line is 5, a long line is 10. So that would be 55 knots. That would be 60 knots, for example. And the wind is heading in the direction the arrow is pointing. The numbers over here are the temperatures aloft at a given altitude, and I set this to whatever altitude it was, 30-something thousand feet, I forget. We have pyramids, we'll talk about them in a second, and then we have things that we affectionately call pickles. We call them pickles because they look like, well, pickles. The green splotches and the blue splotches indicate precipitation. Blue is generally going to be frozen precipitation like snow. Green is going to be rain. Yellow, orange, or red will indicate different intensities of rainfall. You can see that our route today from Nashville to Washington, D.C. departs within the area of a pickle. You can also see that given how the pickle encompasses the area all around Nashville, is that we can't really avoid this area entirely. So what can we do? I'm going to look at my pickle. I'm going to tap on the pickle. When I tap on it, I'm going to get a little info box. What is happening here? I'm expecting light to occasional moderate turbulence between 29,000 feet and 37,000 feet. So even though I have to depart within the pickle area, if I make sure I stay below 29,000 feet, I should, in theory, stay out of the turbulence. And that's something we're looking at. No matter where we're flying to, we're going to look at all of our pickles that happen to be along our route of flight, and we're going to take a look at them. 32 to 38, light, occasional, moderate. This one's going to be 29 to 37, light to occasional, moderate turbulence. 32 to 38, light to occasional, moderate turbulence. So in the event that we can't go around the area entirely, whether it's a large area and it's not fuel efficient to go around it, whether the FAA is forcing us to kind of fly through it for their traffic management, or maybe the pickle just happens to be on top of our destination or on top of our point of departure, we're going to look at the altitudes of it to see if we can fly under it or over it if we have to go through that area. And now remember I said we're going to talk about these little pyramids, what they mean? The pyramids are pilot reports, or PIREP for short. Pilot reports are just what they sound. It is a pilot who reported something to air traffic control, and these are some of the most accurate bits of information for us to know where turbulence is or what other meteorological conditions are happening at any point in time. So this is a PIREP coming out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Texas. And we can see here it's moderate turbulence. By a 737 at 1240, during the climb, a 737 reported light to moderate turbulence between 11,000 and 14,000 feet, which is really important for me to know as a captain because that means I'm going to tell my cabin crew to remain seated when they get the double chime going through 10,000 feet so they don't get injured while we're climbing through this area of turbulence. So now back to your question. These are all the tools that we use to avoid the areas that we can avoid or to mitigate the areas that we can't avoid entirely. Now, what happens if we're flying along and turbulence just happens? And it can. This is why we tell you guys that even though the seatbelt sign's off, please keep your seatbelt fastened for any unexpected turbulence, because turbulence is one of those fickle things that's not that easy to predict. So we could be flying along in an area that's not supposed to have turbulence. All of a sudden we start to get into some bumps, right? And whether or not I'm going to change altitude really depends on how long the bumps are going on and how severe the bumps are. But let's say we get to the point that the bumps are uncomfortable enough that I want to change altitude. And what's that for me? The way I gauge it is if I'm trying to pour liquid from a bottle into a cup and I can't keep the liquid in the cup, I'm probably going to have to change altitude. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get on the radio with air traffic control, either myself or the first officer, whoever's monitoring the radios for that leg. And we're going to say, hey, we're getting some bumps at this altitude. Do you have any reports from aircraft ahead of us? How are their rides looking? It's called a ride report. And they'll either already have reports that pilots told them, or he'll query a pilot ahead of us. He can ask people who are a little bit above, a little bit below, just so we have an idea. And based on that information, we will then go to the smoother ride or the best option. And sometimes the option is just to ride out the turbulence. So as we near the 7-minute mark of this video, I hope that clarified a little bit of what we're looking for regarding turbulence, how we avoid the areas, how we try to find smoother rides for you guys. Of course, if you're on an airplane and the seatbelt sign is on, please respect it. I promise you it's on for a reason. And even if it's off, unless you're standing, keep your seatbelts fastened for any unexpected turbulence we may encounter as you progress towards your destination. Of course, if you have more questions, post in the comments below. I'm always happy to help. And until next time, I'll see you on board.